So at this point there are 15 factions in the game and 61 legendary lords if I can actually count, and at this point it's basically a degree's worth of studying to try and learn them all. So I thought it was a good idea to summarise what every single faction does in the entire game in as little time as possible, so you know exactly what you're getting into when you decide to pick up a new faction. You know what else you should really get into? The new COLONELDAMNEDERS merch. I'm not wearing it because I don't have it yet, but I'm going to put a PNG right here. It's pretty epic. You should definitely get some. Please, I desperately need it. Otherwise, how am I going to afford to feed my 10 illegitimate children in Malaysia? Okay? Thank you very much. Just thought I'd mention that right now. Oh, and if you want 10% off, just use code VLADTHEDAD and 10% off, yes, on the Epic merch store. So there's a link in the description for that. Appreciate it very much. So yeah, before we get going with this one, a couple of things I want to mention. I'm using a bit of lore to try and, spice things up, make it a bit more interesting. I'm no Cody Bonds or Great Book of Grudges or any of those dorks. So I'm using the Warhammer wiki because I'm not buying any of those books. They're really expensive. And so if anything's wrong, it's come from the wiki, so blame that, don't blame me, okay? But all this other stuff, this has come from my genius-level intellect, so all the other game stuff, you can blame that on me. Also, this video is assuming that you own, or at least know about all the DLC in the game, because if you don't own all the DLC, or at least, acknowledge that it all exists, then you're not really getting the full scope of what the faction can truly do at maximum power. Also, this is going to be me giving brief notes on how each faction works. This isn't going to go into the in-depth review of how every single lord in that faction works. If you want me to do videos that are like this, like that, then be sure to leave a comment down below as aggressively as possible. Tell me that that's what I should do, because I'd be totally down to that. It sounds like a fun video to make, to be honest with you. Not like the regular guides, much more quick and fast-paced and just give you a taste of what that faction can do without going into too much detail. This video is going to eventually cover all of the factions in Warhammer 2, the full Mortal Empire, so the Empire and stuff. But I got writing this, and I'm like 7 pages in and 3,000 words, so I thought this video is going to be way too long. So I'm going to split this into 2. So this episode, we're going to cover the High Elves, the Dark Elves, the Lizardmen, the Rats, the Tomb Kings, and the Vampire Coast, which is all the factions in Warhammer 2. And then next video, I will focus on the Empire, the Dwarves, the Greenskins, the Vampire Counts, Bretonnia, Norska, the Warriors of Chaos, the Beastmen, and the Wood Elves. Yes, I know there's like 9 more here and 6 on this first one. But let's be honest, like 3 of them in the next video, they really don't have much going for them. It won't take me long to talk about them, okay? Let's get into this. Yes, without further ado, let's get into this, starting with the High Elves. Now, they are one of the most ancient and powerful mortal races in the entire world, pretty much, and they are based on this delightful, tasty-looking donut island, which is called Ulthuan. So yes, these guys sit on this donut-shaped island, which in the middle of it is the vortex of magic, which basically supplies all the magic winds in the entire world. And their sole purpose is pretty much to protect this as resolutely as they can. They will not stop, they will not surrender it. You'll have to kill them to get control of the vortex. In the campaign, they are a proud member of Team Ordertide, which means they benefit from fantastic trade, being insanely rich, having tons of allies, lasting until the end game without even having to try, being one of the easiest factions in the game. The list really goes on about why the Ordertide and being a member of it is so great. But I'm not going to go into that just yet, because there's a whole other video in itself, the Ordertide, because goddamn they're pretty foul. But basically, in layman's terms, this means that they are one of the good guys, and as I said, this means they benefit from trade, and not only do they benefit from trade from being one of the good guys, but the High Elves specifically benefit a lot from trade. They get more money from their trade deals, and also any person that they are a trade partner with, they get insight into their lands. So if you kind of want to know what some other factions are doing, it's almost worth befriending them, getting a trade agreement and saying, I can see they've got all these cities, this is what they're doing, okay, they're not a threat, I'll leave them, or if they are a threat, maybe lose some of that reliability, just get in there. They also have another faction mechanic, which is called Influence. It's basically a currency that you can use on several different things, like special lords that are much better than the basic lords that you can get without spending influence, specific events that the faction comes up with. You can use it to influence diplomatic relations between your factions and other factions and other factions and other factions. So if you want 2 Lizardmen factions to hate each other, you can do that using influence. It's pretty cool stuff, actually. And you gain it through pretty much doing anything to do with the faction, random missions, winning battles, hero actions, existing. You just get loads of this stuff just by playing through the game, so you'll always have some handy to do some interesting stuff. Now, in battle, they have a really great roster with strong units in pretty much every category. The shining star of the High Elf roster, though, is absolutely their range units. Specifically, the Sisters of Avalon. Sorry, just threw up in my mouth thinking about how disgustingly overpowered they are. They are stupidly strong. There's a reason that they are the High Elf Doomstack. They are incredible. But all of their range units, in fact, are pretty much fantastic. They have great range and decent damage. It might not be out of this world, but when you're shooting at someone for that long before they get to you, they're going to be torn to pieces if you're shooting straws at them, okay? These guys, insane range, and they can take out pretty much anything from turn 1. But on top of having good range units, they also have decent cav in the form of Dragon Princes. They have a pretty good front line in the form of Lord and Sea Guard, Swordmaster of Hoeth, Phoenix Guard. Pretty much every single unit in the faction can be good if used properly. So if you know how to use every unit in the roster, then you're pretty much going to be able to get some use out of all of them. On top of this, they also have a bunch of strong monsters in the form of loads of fantastic dragons, and also they have a quite nice range of spellcasters to both lead and be embedded in your armies. So no matter what category you're focusing on, the High Elves have got you covered. Now, we all know my battle playstyle is kind of defensive, but for the High Elves, it really do be that way. They have a fantastic range, so why would you advance on the enemy? Just get within range, shoot them to pieces, and then anything that makes it to your front lines, they're going to get taken out by the Swordmasters of Hoeth, the Dragons, or your Lords. So, you know, holding your ground, unless the enemy is outranging you with some like Hellstorm rocket batteries or something, is a pretty good idea. One final thing to note is that these guys are always the strongest when they're at full health, and I know that kind of doesn't make any sense because of course the strongest at full health, but due to martial prowess, whenever the units are at full health, they perform better in melee. I don't know the exact buffs, so I'll put them on screen now if I can find them, but all you need to know is when they're at full strength, they fight a hell of a lot better than when they are below 75% strength, because I believe that is the threshold. So yeah, they're pretty good, they're very strong. Now for difficulty. This isn't going to be a proper ranking, this is just going to be some general tips as to when you should be able to pick them up, and for the High Elves, you can pick them up whenever. Honestly, my first faction, I say this all the time, was the High Elves. It was Tyrion, it was the Vortex campaign. I completed that shit, it was so easy. I never played Total War very much before then, and I never ever finished a campaign in any Total War game at all, and then I played Tyrion, and it was easy, and oh boy, it got me hooked on the game, as well as you can see, that it's kind of become, you know, part of my life at this point. So yes, with them being in the Order Tide, one of the richest factions in the game, a fantastic roster, great campaign control, just strong in every aspect of the game, yeah, they are a beginner's dream. If you are looking to get into Total War, Warhammer, or any Total War for that matter, the High Elves are a really good place to start because they're just so easy. So yes, pick up the High Elves, you don't really need any experience to play them, just have a go, you'll have a great time. Now for the Dark Elves. These are kind of the edgy cousins of the High Elves. They are the most ancient and the most sadistic of all the elven races in the known world. These guys, they're just not nice, really. They're pretty much just the Dark Elves if they listen to My Chemical Romance non-stop, okay? That's what we're dealing with here, these kinds of edgy teens. Now, in general, these guys are based in the northwestern part of the map, or I suppose it's northwestern? I can't remember which way the camera flips it. Anyway, they're based in the northwestern part of the map, which is the Frozen Mountains. So, you know, it's a very cheerful, nice place to vacation. Just go up there and freeze your ass off and get enslaved and probably murdered. It's a great time. And because these guys are so edgy, they of course hate everything in the known world. Everything, everyone, they don't like them. They want to either burn them to ashes or enslave them. Which brings me on to the next point. Oh boy, these guys can have a severely robust economy due to the aforementioned slavery. Everything that you do, battles, taking settlements, taking over factions, everything to do with taking on other, whatever they may be, humans, rats, lizards, it doesn't matter, gets you slaves. And what do slaves get you? Money. They also get you negative public order, but money, slightly unhappy settlement. Money, possible rebellion that you can farm for more slaves to get more money. I'm going to go for the money, thank you very much. And because they are slavers, very canonically, they excel at naval domination. They have these things which are called black arcs, which are basically like mobile naval settlements that can also carry armies at the same time. And they just provide buffs to all armies within their massive sphere of influence when they go into a specific stance. They are incredibly strong, you should absolutely be using them. If you're not using them, you're not playing the Dark Elves correctly, okay? This comes from a guy that hates the Dark Elves, played a terrible campaign as them. I played Marathi, okay? I played the Marathi campaign, and I managed to get to the end, okay? So take my word for it, use the Black Arcs, they're incredible. As I said, their economy is completely held up by slavery. They can get basically no trade agreements, they hate everyone, everything. They can get a few trade agreements with other Dark Elves, but ever since someone took Malekith's Maroon 5 CD, he just really hasn't been the same. He can't trade with anyone, he just has severe trust issues. It's quite sad to be honest with you.
Right, who's got my Maroon 5 CD? It's gone missing. Well?
It's even at the point where they are so edgy and hate each other that much that even within the same faction they can't really get along. This means that all the lords that aren't legendary have this thing called loyalty. What this basically means is if that leader runs out of loyalty, either they don't fight enough, they don't get an army, they don't, you don't give them enough back rubs at the weekly meetup, they will get mad, they will defect and take their entire army with it. So you could have this guy, he has a fantastic army, you leave him sitting around for a while because there's not much to do, he gets bored, defects, and then you have this guy with your fantastic army that you've built walking around raising all your settlements. It's a massive pain in the ass. I do not like loyalty, but I can see why it's in the Dark Elves, okay? It's just another thing that you have to manage. Now, in battle, they are, again, kind of the more aggressive and less refined version of the High Elves. Yes, early on, they do have a little bit more damage, if you ask me, but they have a lot less range. Like, their starting archers are arm-piercing, which is pretty insane, but they have, like, half the range of the High Elf archers, so it kind of balances off that once they get into range, they're going to do more damage, but it takes them a lot longer to get into range, so the overall damage is the same. But anyway, now rather than focusing solely on these ranged units and their front line to do a lot of the damage, the Dark Elves are a lot more reliant on monsters, and this means they have, Hydras, Charybdis, Manticores, they've got the Harpies, they've got quite a lot of monsters for a faction that really isn't that monstrous to begin with, and they use these guys to do the majority of their damage in battles. If you ask me, this makes their battles a lot more chaotic, but also a lot more fun, so you can't really follow them there. They also have a faction mechanic called Murderous Prowess, which means that when your army gets a certain number of kills, hits the threshold, they get buffed for a load of effects, and I can't really remember them all. Again, I'll put them on screen now if I can find them, but all you need to know is, once they reach a certain number of kills, they get a load of buffs. Now, you can't choose when this happens, so it can happen at a really inopportune time, like when the battle's over, or when you're all starting to retreat, but nevertheless it's there, it's pretty cool, and if you rush into a load of chaff, you can pop it early and get a load of value out of it. So it's pretty cool. Final thing you should know about is, of course, leading their armies. They have quite a variety of spellcasters, they have some frontlines lords, some beast tame lords, and even some ranged lords, so there really is something for everyone if you're looking for that. Now, as for difficulty, again, I wouldn't really say that these guys are difficult, I just say that they have a lot more going on than your average Order Tide faction, and thus that makes them more complicated and more difficult to get into. It all basically boils down to, because you're not a member of the good guys, you get a lot more people coming after you and want to invade you, and not really as many people jump into your aid and trying to defend you. Like, by the end game, the Order Tide, they have this massive alliance and you can't touch them, and most of the bad factions will have been eradicated or just alone and don't really have any alliances because, you know, the bad don't really like anyone. So it just means that once you get to late game, you're going to have a tough time taking on the Order Tide, and in the early game, you might have a lot of guys coming after you. So if you can deal with that, it's not too bad, but if you can't deal with that, it's pretty difficult. That being said, if you manage to use this to your advantage and, you know, win all your battles and get tons of slaves, then you can drown the world in an ocean of coin, and it doesn't really matter. So I would say they're not too bad, a good intermediate. You know, if you've finished the High Elves and you're looking for a bit more of a challenge, then try these guys, because they're pretty much the same, but edgier. The Lizardmen are sometimes referred to as the Cold Ones or the Children of the Gods, and they are essentially an ancient race of reptilian humanoids that run the world economy, much like they do today. Now, most of them start in Lustria, which is it's a cesspit of hell and despair, and you really don't want to go there. But the Lizardmen, they kind of make it their home, so I'll let them off just this once. Now, their campaign focus is really strange because they don't really have a specific goal in mind, outside of the Vortex campaign, of course, but the best I can make of it is that they want to establish a geomantic web of different settlements, and what this basically means is, you get settlements, you build this specific building, basically the more settlements you have that have these buildings in them that upgrade the geomantic web, the more powerful your commandments get. And once your commandments get to like the max level, they're actually insanely strong. Unfortunately, as someone that has played the Lizardmen up to 200 turns and above, it takes a long ass time for this effect to even come into use. I think I was at turn 180, and I had like level 3 at tops. So yeah, it takes quite a long time, but once it gets there, oh boy, it's strong. You can also get missions for Blessed Spawnings, which are basically like regiments of renown that locks behind these missions. Upon completing them, you get access to a bunch of units that you might not be able to recruit at the time. It could be some Saurus, or it could be a dinosaur. So, you know, it's really worth pushing through, seeing what you get, and then recruiting those units because they could give you a serious advantage, depending on what stage in the game you're at. Now, in battle, I would say that the Lizardmen definitely fall into the category of quality over quantity, but they really force it because their early game units are so expensive, and their early game economy is so shit. Like, they really can't pull in a lot of gold. They have this thing called cold-blooded diplomacy, which basically means if a Lizardman doesn't like you, like actually actively like you a lot, they will not give you the time of day. You know, if they do like you, oh boy, easy confederations, easy military alliances, trade agreements, whatever you want. But up until that point where they, you know, reach the threshold, they'll think, you know what, that guy's alright. They won't give you shit. So you just kind of have to try and trade with the Empire guys that are nearby, although the nearest one is Marcus Wolfheart, who's a major faction, and he really doesn't like you. So maybe try to look with the High Elves, I don't know. Just really, you need as much help as you can get in the early game because your economy is absolute garbage and your units are so expensive. But nevertheless, moving away from costs, their faction army is fantastic. Starting with Saurus and going to the end of Temple Guard, the front line is insanely tough compared to any other unit in the game that can be unlocked at the same time. Your front line against their front line, it will outlast them, even if they aren't doing as much damage. You are just so insanely tough, you can just take that punishment, and it is a battle of attrition. You will win it, because your front line is stupid tough. Now, your back line, it's not too amazing, you know, you have chameleon skinks and stuff. I don't personally think they're that incredible, but they have poison damage, so I can't complain too much. But the real action of the Lizardmen roster definitely comes in the form of the dinosaurs, or the monsters if you want to be boring. Now, as soon as you unlock even one of these dinosaurs, I'm going to call them dinosaurs. I know they're not because salamanders and stuff, they're not dinosaurs and croc scars, but I'm going to call them dinosaurs because it's fun to say, okay? Once you unlock these dinosaurs, you can get a variety of them for any situation. Has the enemy got tides and tides of Skaven slaves, or just a bunch of infantry that you need to take out, send in a Carnosaur and watch it take them to pieces. Does the enemy bring a load of large units you really need to snipe out with ranged firepower? Bring a Stegodon or a Solar Engine Bastillodon. Does the enemy have a load of undead units you can't really seem to shake? Bring salamanders and drown them in fiery death. These guys, incredible. Every single monster, dinosaur, whatever you want to call them, they're fantastic. They serve a purpose. You can have an entire army of just dinosaurs and it will do fantastically well. I promise you that. I'd like to try that at some point, actually. Write that down. Now, as for their army leaders, they have a huge variety. They have giant spellcasting toads. They have massive croc scores that can just tear things to pieces. They have a pasty-ass Saurus that has not seen the sun in literally decades, hundreds of years maybe. They have a little lizard that carries around the 10 Commandments, and who can we get the most sexy lord of all? Mazdamundi himself.
Damn, boy, he's thick! Boy, that's a thick-ass boy! Damn!
Now, as for difficulty, because they are a good guy, again, I would say that these guys are on the easier side, and as I mentioned, their front line, it can stand up to any front line in the game that is unlocked at the same time, so while you're going along, if you keep up with everyone else, you're going to have the advantage, so it does make it a lot easier in that department. I'd say the majority of their challenge comes from their economy, because as I said, it's quite weak, so until you get the ball rolling, you are kind of going from, recruiting one unit a turn, and then just barely using it to win battles, and then just using that gold to get one more unit, and then barely using it to win a battle. Just kind of going from that, just scraping by up until you get to the point where you can support yourself, and then just catapult into the stratosphere of all the dinosaurs. It's fantastic. But until you get to that point, it's a little bit of a challenge. So I would say, again, the High Elves are the ones you want to try first. If you have played a bit of Total War before and you'd like to challenge yourself a little bit more than the High Elves, then I would say the Lizardmen are a good place to start in Warhammer. Because they just have insane variety, it'll get you used to using all the different unit types, and let's be honest, they're loads of fun, they look cool, I love these guys. Give them a try. Now we come to the Skaven, also known as Ratmen, also known as Ratkin, also known as descendants of the big rat who makes all the rules, and these guys are pure chaos. Honestly, if I tried to tell you like a set strategy for playing the Skaven, it's just a joke, because that isn't what they do. They are pure chaos. You just do whatever's in front of you, you tear it to pieces, you make money, you make food, you eat things, it's all they do, it's pure chaos. But if you had to hold a gun to me and say, what is the Skaven strategy? Hang on, I have a gun somewhere, don't I? Oh no, it's upstairs. Oh, a Nerf gun. There's a car phone mount, so I'm going to hold this to my head instead, so I don't get demonetized. Pretty good one. But yes, if you were to hold a car phone mount to my head and force me to tell you what the Skaven strategy was, it'd go something like this. Pretty much rapid colonization while simultaneously trying to make as much food as possible. Because yes, the Skaven is the only faction in the game that requires food. Because all of your guys, they're not smart enough to form, a good economy of constantly creating food so you can feed your guys. No. They run out of it. They also run out of gold, so, it's not just that. They have food and gold, it's a right pain, but what are you going to do about it, okay? It's very canonical, so I'll allow it. Now, as I mentioned, since they are basically just feral, they can't grow food themselves, so they need to get food from other sources. Well, since you're a giant rat, they eat pretty much anything. They'll eat the Empire, they'll eat lizards, they'll eat other rats. They really could not care less, as long as it's meat, as long as it's anything. It doesn't even have to be meat. They will eat anything that you throw at them. So you get food from anything, winning battles, underseas, settlements, commandments. You get food from everywhere. But that doesn't mean that it's easy to manage. Oh no. Food is a right pain in the arse because it is constantly being consumed. So as quickly as you are making it, and then you start consuming more, you need to start making even more. And if you've been making it via like temporary fixes, like taking settlements, winning battles, raiding, then you're going to be in some real trouble because then you're going to start running out of food. When you run out of food, the campaign becomes a massive slog because it just slows everything down. But I digress, I've talked enough about food. It's a mechanic, it's quite annoying, but you can manage it. Another thing that Skaven have access to is the underseas. Now this is, again, very canonical, and basically, in the lore, as far as I know at least, they don't really inhabit any settlements over ground, it's just all underseas. They find a settlement, they create something underneath it and just slowly siphon off people and eat them or something like that. I don't know. I'm not the Great Book of Grudges, okay? If you wanted lore, you'd go to someone like him, okay? Not me. But in the game, they can in fact inhabit settlements, as well as creating underseas. Now they're kind of just used to give things to your faction based on what's above them. So if they have a really good gold producing city above them, they can siphon some gold off of that. If it's not really doing anything, they can just siphon some food. If it's a settlement that you want to take, you can create a vermin tide, which will literally just rise up out of the ground when it's finished being built and just take over the city for you. Or if you ick it claw, you can just nuke it, because that's pretty cool, I guess. I'm not sure why I'd want to do that, because why wouldn't you just want the settlements? But anyway, yes, you can nuke it. Why not? So yes, undersea is a great part of the faction. Another thing that is really strong for the faction is the ambush mechanic. Now, you may know I have some mixed feelings about the ambush mechanic, because when it happens to me, it makes me want to die, okay? I hate it when I'm sat there, encamped, and I get ambushed by a Skaven that I've literally seen walk up to me, and then I'm all of a sudden getting ambushed by him when I could see him coming with my binoculars. It makes me a little bit salty. But when you're playing the Skaven, oh boy, it's a complete opposite feeling. When you are ambushing someone that's sat there, and they can see you coming, and then you ambush them anyway, oh boy, it just takes your chances from winning from like this much to this much. It's crazy. The balance of power bar, it shits itself. It doesn't know what to do, because you just have such a higher chance of winning when it's an ambush, and you can just ambush someone when they're encamped. It's disgusting, but it's super strong. And one final thing to cement this pure chaos playstyle is they create Skaven corruption. Now, you may be wondering, Skaven corruption, is it like regular corruption, ruins the public order of factions? And yes, it does. It ruins the public order of every faction that isn't Skaven. It also ruins the public order of factions that are Skaven. Because fuck it, why not, I guess? If you're going to ruin the public order of everyone else, you may as well do it for yourself, being a bit fair. I mean, on top of this, it also increases the amount of summons that you can get in a battle, because in battles you can summon clan rats from the ground for some ungodknown reason. It's really annoying when it happens to you, but sure, why not? They can have that. So the more corruption you get, the more of that you can do, which is pretty cool, but it's so bizarre that they create corruption that their own faction hates. But I'll let them off. Now, if you ask me what the Skaven battle performance was like with no DLC, then I wouldn't even know where to start. I'd probably tell you, get a few monsters, a few war machines, and a bunch of artillery, and that'll probably see you alright. But the Skaven DLC is pretty much essential. I'm talking about the Icky Claw one here, the Prophet and the Warlock. That DLC, for me, is essential to the Skaven. Without it, they're a absolute shit tier faction. They can't do anything. With it, oh boy. It's like the Vampire Coast on steroids, alright? Now, rather than having, rats with swords and then giant rats that make all the rules going in and whacking things, I'd probably prefer to have, rats with miniguns, sniper rifles, mortars attached to their backs, poison globes, flamethrowers. Pretty much, if you can get a rat to carry something that would commit a war crime, that's pretty much my strategy for playing the Skaven, because it is so damn overpowered. Range supremacy is the true rat strat, okay? There's nothing better, if you ask me. I'm probably wrong, but in my personal baby experience, this is the best way to play them. And it's certainly most fun and cinematic. Now all you need to do for this strategy to work is set up your gun lines, get some Skaven slaves in front of you to just absorb the enemy charges, and then tear them to pieces. The enemy, of course, not the Skaven slaves. Any Skaven slaves that you see getting shot to pieces is unintentional team killing and very depressing friendly fire that should not happen to begin with. And it's a real tragedy that it does. But I'm sure it'll be fine anyway. I mean, yes, there are also great war machines. The Doom wheels are fantastic. The Doom flares are also pretty good. And the artillery is also quite nice. But the guns are where it's at. They carry the faction so hard. They are stupid good. The guns are where it's at. Now, as for difficulty, I'd say the Skaven are one of those factions that are only as difficult as you're willing to make them. If you're willing to embrace the cheese and just play like an absolute rat, just steal food wherever you can, colonize when the enemy's not looking, ambush them all the time, shoot them to pieces from afar before they can even see you, then you're going to have a great time. You embrace the cheese, it just works out. But if you're not really willing to do that, if you want to play more honourable, then go back to the High Elves, because you're not going to have a good time playing the Skaven like you would play the High Elves. It's a very unique playstyle, and that being said, I think if you have played an Order-Tide campaign and you want something that's a lot different and will challenge you a little bit and force you to play in a different way, then I'd say the Skaven is a great place to start, because they are really easy once they get going, but it is just a lot to learn coming from someone that's never played a faction like them before, and to be honest, there isn't really another faction that's like them. Now we come to the Tomb Kings, and the Tomb Kings were basically these ancient rulers of a fantastic place called Nehekara, which I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, I'm almost definitely not, but that's what I'm going to pronounce it as anyway, because I'm a little white boy and I don't know how to speak other languages. They were basically an ancient human civilization, which was around like 2,500 years before Sigmar was even born. So essentially, they were the Empire before the Empire even existed, which is pretty cool if you think about it. Now, the Tomb Kings themselves have risen back up, and they want, to take back over the deserts. That's what they were born to do. And so they've just raised back up their settlements and raised their colonies and raised their armies, and thereby they don't really need to pay them anything, and they have no reason for gold or food. So as such, have no upkeep for armies and barely any upkeep for settlements. So it's really weird. You think they'd be supremely rich, but in fact, they are dirt poor. Yep. When you're in the desert and there's nothing to do but eat sand, turns out you eat sand. There's no gold to be had. You make no gold in the desert. It's depressing. You are so poor. Now, as I mentioned, their focus is reserved for the bottom right of the map, or the southeast, if you will. This area is the desert, and this is where you want to focus all of your efforts, unless you're playing, the Exiles of the Heck, but we'll just ignore them for now. You want to focus on the desert, because in the desert, there are these settlements that have pyramids in. And when you get these pyramids, they get you fantastic effects for your faction, and you want to pick up as many of these as you can. So, if you ever get the inkling to, spread up to the mountains, take on the Greenskins, the Dwarves, maybe even the Empire, yeah, don't do it, it's entirely pointless. You can win the game without even leaving the desert, so yeah, you should do that instead. Now, instead of rolling in gold, these guys like to collect canopic jars, and they get these by, winning battles, they get them from hero actions, they get them from pretty much everything in the game, it's one of those currencies. And they can combine these canopic jars with materials you earn from trading to create magical items, as well as legions of legend, which are essentially just regiments of renown that are locked behind an in-game paywall, which is a little bit strange, but I'll allow it. Another thing is that since armies are free, you are very limited in what you can recruit, because if armies were free and, you didn't really have to pay to upkeep them or recruit them, then you could just, make massive armies full of tomb scorpions and sphinxes and just take over the whole world. So to limit that, what they've done is all your armies and units are free, but you can only recruit a specific capacity of each unit. And what this means is, if you get a building that lets you recruit 2 Tomb Scorpions, then that is all you can have in the faction until you build another one of those buildings that gets you 2 more Tomb Scorpions. That makes sense? So if you want to have fantastic armies with a bunch of the best units, you're going to have a lot of settlements, a lot of buildings in them, which is a little bit difficult when you have no gold. And also, if you want multiple armies, then you need to research to be able to get multiple armies, because otherwise, you're very limited yet again. You can see that they kind of made it really open, that you can have as many armies as you want, there's no upkeep whatsoever, and then they're like, god damn, that's a little bit overpowered, I'm going to just roll it back a little bit and just add like 10 mechanics to it, make it a lot harder than it should be. But nevertheless, it is a fun, unique playstyle, I would say. Now, in battle, they are totally carried by their constructs, which are basically low-fat dinosaurs. And by low-fat, I mean no skin, or blood, or bone. They're all pretty much just made of stone and stuff, so they're really cool, actually. They're really strong. What this basically means is there is a construct for every situation in the game. Do you need a large target taken out? Boom, send in the Necrosphinx. Do you need a bunch of infantry taken out? Boom, send in the War Sphinx. Do you need some units snuck upon and shot to pieces with magical attacks? Boom, send in the Sepulchral Stalkers. There is a construct for every single use case in the game, and they are really fun and really cool. Other than the constructs though, they don't really have a lot going for them. Their front line, it's alright, but even Tomb Guard will lose to stuff that's of the same tier eventually. The range units again, the archers, they're nice to have, and of course I recommend taking a few of them, because range superiority is superiority. You always want to have some ranged at all, but they're not incredible, they don't do much damage, and they crumble almost immediately, so it's kind of depressing. Their artillery isn't too bad, in fact. The Casket of Souls is a really good unit, but it's a Legion of Legends, so you need to spam Canopic Jars to unlock plenty of them, and the Screaming Skull Catapult ain't too bad. But as for that, yeah, pretty much nothing else. I mean, the Chariots are okay, but I'm too small-brained to use them, so nobody cares. The Lords are also a touch limited too, once you've got all the Legendary Lords. Other than the guys that you can recruit by researching the other dynasties, you can't really get much else other than the regular Tomb Kings, which are just Fighting Lords. They're not spellcasters or anything like that, they can't get any incredible mounts. They're just kind of boring, to be honest with you, Chief. As for the heroes, they have a couple of Lords of Magic, but none of them are particularly exciting. The Necrotechs are quite good, but they're more of a campaign unit than a battle unit, if you ask me. And the Tomb Princes, they're just fires. They don't really do anything, so yeah. Lords and heroes, a little bit limited, but what can you do? The army itself is quite exciting, so it doesn't really matter who's leading it. As for difficulty, I would say the Tomb Kings are a weird faction that isn't difficult per se, they just have a very unique playstyle. And that means that if you've never played a faction like them before, it's going to be really jarring to get in there and think, okay, I have no upkeep, why do I have no money? It makes it really concerning. You think you're doing something wrong, you're like, why is it like turn 20 and I'm making like 200 gold per turn? It doesn't make any sense. It's just how it is when you're playing as the Tomb Kings. It's just a very unique thing to get used to, and once you get past that and you get into the later game, they do actually start to get on a bit of a roll, start to make a little bit more money, and then they can buy a load of buildings, build the armies that you want, and then just roll over the entire desert and take over in a matter of turns. Overall, I'd say they are more easy than they are hard, but I think you just need to come into playing them with a bit of an open mind, because if you come into playing them and think, okay, this should be like a regular faction, like the High Elves or something, yeah, it's not going to work, so open mind, and I think you'll do just fine. Now, as for the Vampire Coast, I looked up some lore on these guys on the wiki. There's not much, okay? All I could find out was that Luther Harkon created these guys called the Vampire Coast, and they don't even know where he came from. He was just on a Norscan Raiders boat with a sarcophagus on it, and he was in the sarcophagus. The Norscan Raiders all died at sea, and he resurrected them, and boom, there you go, the Vampire Coast. Now, I think the Vampire Coast are one of the biggest successes in dedicating themselves to a theme, because every single aspect of this faction is piratey. I would just define them as pure pirates. When I saw the trailer, I was pumped. And you know what? They're not that great, but they are pretty fun, and they are very piratey. I think they perform best if you just play them like a pirate, You go around the coastlines, harass them, sack them, raid them, build up a mountain of coin, don't really have to settle anywhere. I mean, they are one of those factions that can settle, but due to the shipbuilding mechanic, which basically makes them into a horde faction, they can just recruit units from their legendary lords and never have to make a settlement themselves. I mean, if they run out of settlements, then they'll get the attrition thing that most factions do. But other than that, if you just keep one settlement and defend it a real lot, then you don't really need any others. I mean, of course you can pick them up for background income, and if you want to set up a base of operations far away from your legendary lords or someone that can recruit, then that's fair enough, but it's not really necessary if you're not bothered for it. Now, doing all this piratey stuff gains you infamy, and as you move up the ladder of infamy, you get the chance to take on stronger and stronger legendary pirate lords. Once you defeat a certain number of these pirate lords, you get to fight the special guys, which have one of 3 verses of a legendary sea shanty, which we can only assume is the SpongeBob SquarePants EDM remix, because that shit is a banger. Another piratey thing they can do is set up pirate codes, which are basically mini undercities, which you can establish either by attacking a settlement and creating one, which I don't know why you'd ever do that. It's probably just better to take the settlement and then take its money. Alternatively, you can set it up using one of your vampire fleet captains, send them in there, create a pirate cove, and all it basically does is siphons gold from the parent settlement. So if you send your vampire fleet captains over to like Lorthen, Nagaron, Altdorf, all these places that are on a coastline, but also, you know, make a lot of gold, then you can siphon a lot of gold for them. They can create a incredibly robust economy. I highly recommend using them as much as you can. But as for taking them after battle, there doesn't really seem to be a point in that, because if you're going to take all the money that the place is making anyway, you may as well just take the place and make the money for yourself. Now, as for battle, again, very piratey. The front line, it's alright, you know, they have some banshees, they're pretty cool. The depth guard aren't too bad, and the zombie pirates deck and mob are just zombies that look like pirates. There's nothing exciting. But the gunpowder units, oh boy, they are fantastic from pretty much the handgunners onwards. Once you get to the handgunners, everything above that, it's just like, it's an exponential growth of how cool and how effective the unit is. It's just, you know, you get the handgunners, then you get the bombers, then you get the deck gunners, and then you get the Shade Wraith deck gunners, and they just get astronomically good. The gunpowder units, so perfect for the theme of the faction, and so strong. I love playing them. It's a very unique playstyle. They also have stupidly cool thematic monsters, like the straight out of a Pirates of the Caribbean movie. You know, we got the Neck Effect Colossus, we got the big crabs, we got the little crabs, we got the fat guys, we got the fat guys with a crab claw. They're really cool, and there is a massive variety, and they're all pretty effective if you use them correctly. And of course, who can forget the fantastic artillery roster, which is pretty much just upheld by Queen Bess. She is one of the best artillery units, if not the best artillery unit in the game. She can take apart a blob of infantry in a single shot. What's that? You've got some Swordmaster of Hoeth coming towards you. What's that, some great swords or something? Oh, just one shot of Queen Bess into the middle of that? Oh, what unit of great swords, okay? Disappeared, it's gone, okay? It is gone. Now, as for their battle strategy, since they are a gunpowder focused faction, it's kind of like the Skaven, apart from... No, it's pretty much like the Skaven, you just shoot into the backs of your guys and don't really care. But setting up your firing lines, it's really fun, it's really reminiscent of Empire Total War, where my 13 fans at, okay guys, I know we all love that game, it was an interesting one. Yes, it's a very unique playstyle, very interesting, much different from pretty much any other faction in Warhammer 2. Again, this faction is one of those that is only as difficult as you're willing to make it. If you try and play them like a normal faction, you know, you just try and go settlement to settlement, don't really focus on raiding and pirate coves and sacking and gunpowder units and practicing that strategy well in battle, then you're going to have a terrible time because you can't shoot over the tops of your guys' heads. You can't really develop as well if you're just taking settlements rather than raiding and sacking them all the time. You're just not going to have as good a time. So, again, I would say that they are quite like the Tomb Kings, that they are more easy than they are hard. You just need to come into them with an open mind and think, okay, I'm kind of playing a Horde-esque faction here, so I don't need to focus completely on expansion, but focus more on making a buttload of money and then just funneling that into stuff that is useful to me. But yes, I think if you do that, you'll have a great time, because these guys are a boatload of fun. Pun absolutely intended. And that concludes it. There we go, that's all of the factions that you get with Warhammer 2. Currently with all the DLCs, minus the ones that are also part of the Game 1 DLCs, but we'll come to them next week, okay? There we go. Yes, if you enjoyed this video, then be sure to leave a like. I would appreciate it very much. If you want me to do videos, as I said, of each of the faction lords, if you want to do, you know, every High Elf lord explained in X amount of minutes, then be sure to comment down below. I'd love to do that. It sounds like a fun video series to do of all the factions in the game, apart from when we get to the ones that have like 2 legendary lords. They'll be insanely short videos, but we can always clump them together, can't we? So I think that'd be a fun idea. One more time, you know, buy the merch. This is one. Yeah, this is the logo shirt. It's pretty cool. It's big on the back. Small on the front, but we also have the ones that have the emotes on. They look pretty cool. You can get them on t-shirts, you can get them on mugs, you can get them on stickers, you can get them on anything you want. You can get them on me if you'd like, okay? We've got loads of stuff on there. Use code VladTheDad at checkout, 10% off your entire order. It's a great deal. Please check it out. I'm a desperate narcissist. I need the validation, okay? So please do it. Thank you. Love you. Yes, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like this, then be sure to subscribe, because as I said, part 2 of this video is coming next week. It's probably going to be even longer, because there's way more factions in Game 1 than there is in Game 2, apparently, for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why, but there is. So if you want to see that, then be sure to click the subscribe button down below. It's like, it's down there somewhere. I'm not sure which side it is, but yeah, be sure to click that, please. I really need it. Okay, thank you. This has been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I will see you in the next episode of the Powerpuff Girls.